Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are not looking at dusty historical documents.
No, not at all.
We are running a forensic analysis on a lightning strike that occurred barely 48 hours ago, an event that has fundamentally reshaped the geopolitical map of the Western Hemisphere.
We are dissecting the minutes and hours of one of the most audacious military operations in recent memory.
That's right, we're doing a deep dive into Operation Absolute Resolve.
The rapid, kinetic military action launched by the U.S. government in the pre-dawn hours of Saturday, January 3rd, 2026.
And the outcome was monumental. The capture of a sitting head of state, Venezuela's Nicolás Maduro, and his wife, Cilia Flores, by Delta Force.
And he is now in U.S. custody right now, awaiting trial in New York City.
It's just incredible. Our sources for this, and we have a stack of them: intelligence reports, diplomatic cables, congressional testimony, and even some first-hand accounts from Caracas. They chronicle the full sweep, from the final authorization given late Friday night through the spectacular airstrikes and the surgical arrest.
And then into the firestorm, the international diplomatic chaos that erupted all day Saturday and just kept churning into Sunday.
So our mission here is crucial. We need to give you a detailed chronological understanding of how this operation unfolded.
And maybe more importantly, what this immediate chaos tells us about the future. We have to look past the military success and really focus on the consequences.
So the core question for this deep dive is this: how could a sitting president be captured and extracted so quickly?
And what are the immediate massive implications for international law, for this new U.S. foreign policy that's being asserted, and frankly, for the sheer instability that's now gripping Venezuela?
We have to understand the long game that allowed this stunning action to happen. Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start far away from the events of Saturday morning.
Right.
Operation Absolute Resolve was not some sudden impulse buy. It was the culmination of months, really years, of groundwork. And it's all rooted in the U.S. government's decision to redefine Nicolás Maduro.
Exactly. He wasn't just a political adversary anymore. He was designated an indicted criminal.
And that designation, that's the legal cornerstone for everything that followed, isn't it?
It is. The entire foundation for this kinetic action was the U.S. federal indictment from way back in 2020, which officially labeled Maduro a narco-terrorist.
And those charges are extremely specific.
Oh, incredibly so. Conspiracy to import cocaine, narco-terrorism, weapons offenses, and crucially, the indictment explicitly links him and his regime directly to transnational criminal organizations.
We're talking about the FARC dissidents in Colombia.
And the extremely violent Venezuelan gang, Tren de Aragua. So it's not just a political charge, it's a criminal one.
And the scale of this alleged activity, I mean, according to the indictment, it's just staggering.
It claims Maduro used his high office, even when he was foreign minister, to facilitate the transport of literally thousands of tons of cocaine into the U.S.
Which, from their perspective, makes it a direct threat to American national security.
Right. And that legal framing allowed the administration to treat the whole thing not as an act of war against a sovereign state,
but as a high-stakes offshore arrest.
A law enforcement action. That legal premise then required extraordinary operational risk. And this is where the story shifts to the clandestine, months-long intelligence mission that began back in August 2025.
A mission our sources called highly dangerous.
Highly dangerous is an understatement.
So when you say that, we really need to understand the stakes. This wasn't just routine satellite surveillance.
No. This was a clandestine team of CIA operatives who infiltrated Venezuela and started working inside Caracas, completely exposed.
Exposed because the U.S. embassy was closed. There was zero diplomatic protection, no immunity.
None. If these operatives were caught, they would have been treated as spies. Full stop.
So they were operating without any kind of safety net.
Absolutely. And their focus was entirely on pattern-of-life intelligence gathering. They combined traditional spycraft recruiting human sources, including at least one confirmed source extremely close to Maduro,
with high-tech assets.
Exactly. Sophisticated stealth drones flying secretly above the capital. Their entire mission was just mapping the target's vulnerabilities.
And that's where the detail becomes truly fascinating, almost intrusive. General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, later confirmed they weren't just locating a residence.
No, they mapped the minute details of Maduro's existence.
We're talking about specific daily movements, his dietary habits, what he ate, when he ate.
What security protocols were relaxed, when they were relaxed.
And even remarkably, details about his family and his pets. Okay, wait, why the pets? What level of detail does knowing about someone's dog provide that is mission critical?
It sounds trivial, right? But that level of detail is everything in tactical intelligence.
How so?
It signals the success of your human intelligence. Knowing about pets or specific meal times, that kind of information often comes from domestic staff or the inner circle security details.
So people who see the target when their guard is completely down?
Precisely. It's the difference between knowing he is in the compound and knowing he is asleep, lights out, and that his security team is accustomed to walking his specific dog at 2:30 a.m. every morning.
I see. That level of habitual detail allows a raid to achieve total surprise.
Total. It reduces the insertion window to mere minutes, which is exactly what they were aiming for.
So all this intelligence was building up beneath the surface, but at the same time, the military pressure was becoming extremely visible.
Yes, starting around August 2025. This was the overt campaign designed to squeeze the regime and test their reactions.
The U.S. began a significant military buildup in the Southern Caribbean.
A huge one. They deployed major naval assets, including the massive USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier. They parked a floating fortress right off Venezuela's coast. This was not subtle. This was signaling intent.
And that buildup quickly translated into kinetic action at sea starting in September.
Right. The U.S. Southern Command began what our sources call a legally disputed campaign against vessels in the Caribbean.
And it was relentless.
And lethal. The U.S. was executing that narco-terrorism mandate aggressively. They were targeting any vessel alleged to be trafficking drugs for the regime.
And the scale is sobering.
It is. Between September and December 2025, reports indicate dozens of boats were destroyed and at least 115 people, drug runners, sailors, were killed in these strikes at sea. This was a clear, escalating, and highly kinetic application of that law enforcement mandate.
Far outside U.S. water.
Well outside.
Then the pressure ratcheted up even more in December. It shifted from drug boats to the regime's only real source of revenue, oil.
Yes, a direct escalation to economic warfare, with the seizure of massive oil tankers carrying sanctioned Venezuelan crude. The U.S. Coast Guard Specialized Forces were conducting tactical boardings, seizing ships like the Skipper.
Which led in late December to the formal announcement of a total and complete blockade of sanctioned oil tankers.
Effectively creating an oil quarantine. And the strategic goal, as Secretary of State Rubio later said, was to use this quarantine to exert such tremendous leverage over the remaining regime figures that they'd be forced into making the right decision about a transition.
The idea being that without oil revenue, the regime just starves.
Right. And crucially, before this main strike, the U.S. had already set a precedent for action on Venezuelan land.
The dock facility.
Exactly. In late December, they knocked out a big facility, described as a dock area linked to drug boats. This was the first known land strike. It conditioned the Venezuelan military to expect limited coastal anti-drug actions.
Not a full regime change operation aimed at the capital city.
Precisely. So by the end of 2025, you have surgically precise intelligence, overwhelming naval pressure, an active economic blockade, and a precedent for small-scale land strikes.
And General Kane confirmed the planning and rehearsals for Operation Absolute Resolve had been ongoing for months.
With the forces ready to go by early December, they just needed the perfect window.
So that brings us to the final moments. If the intelligence was so good, why authorize the strike on Christmas Day and risk a leak? Why not wait until the absolute last minute?
That decision really highlights the political nature of the timing. President Trump authorized the operation as early as December 25th, but he delegated the when to the Pentagon planners.
And they chose the holiday period.
They did, because they knew that a significant number of Venezuelan officials, security personnel, and even high-ranking military commanders would be on vacation or on leave.
It maximized surprise and minimized the chance of a coordinated defense.
Exactly. The political decision was made. The military just waited for the strategic window.
But Mother Nature almost closed that window for them.
It almost did. Adverse weather, a storm system moving through the Caribbean, forced a delay. It threatened to push the mission past that optimal holiday window.
But the skies cleared.
Just enough. It provided a rolling window of opportunity late on Friday, January 2nd. The operation officially launched with some initial air approvals around 4:47 p.m. that afternoon.
With commanders just monitoring weather and intelligence for the next 6 hours.
And the wait ended when President Trump issued the final definitive go-ahead at the precise moment of 10:46 p.m. Friday night.
10:46 p.m. on a Friday? That was the moment the clock started ticking, shifting from months of careful preparation to just chaotic, rapid execution.
Okay, here is where the story gets really kinetic. Let's dive into the minute-by-minute operational timeline in Caracas.
Less than 4 hours after that final go-ahead, the first stage, the suppression phase, began.
Around 2 a.m. local time on Saturday, January 3rd.
And this initial phase was deafening. Residents across Caracas reported loud explosions booming across the capital, the sound of low-flying, unseen aircraft. This wasn't a surgical strike yet.
No, this was pure suppression.
Executed by advanced U.S. warplanes F-35, heavy bombers, and sophisticated drones. General Kane later confirmed the explicit goal was to clear a safe path for the Special Ops helicopters. They needed to own the sky.
And the targets were all chosen to paralyze the state's defensive structure. Absolutely. Key targets like Fuerte Tiuna, the country's main military base.
La Carlota Air Base, essential for air defense.
The El Volcan antenna, a major communications hub, and La Guaira port on the coast.
So the effect was immediate and dramatic.
Reports flooded in of thick clouds of smoke and fire, particularly at Fuerte Tiuna. Widespread power cuts across key military and government sectors. They were effectively blinding and deafening the regime.
Creating the narrow, dark window for the ground team to get in.
Without getting shot down.
But that initial wave of strikes, despite being aimed at military assets, immediately led to tragic collateral damage.
It did. An anonymous Venezuelan official confirmed the attacks resulted in at least 40 casualties, military and civilians caught in the blast radii.
And more specifically, there was a confirmed hit on a civilian apartment complex in Cachi La Mar.
A terrible incident. The strike destroyed an exterior wall, tragically killing one person and seriously injuring another.
And that casualty count immediately gave Caracas the narrative they needed, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. That this was an indiscriminate invasion, not merely an arrest.
So how did Delta Force ensure that the airstrikes didn't compromise the element of surprise they needed for the capture itself?
Speed. The answer is just pure speed, which all those months of detailed intelligence allowed for.
The capture phase began immediately after the airstrikes.
Immediately. And the unit tasked with the seizure was Delta Force, the elite Tier 1 Special Forces unit of the U.S. Army.
The transition was seamless, but not without resistance.
No. Even with air defenses suppressed, U.S. helicopters came under fire near Maduro's compound right at 2:01 a.m.
Literally a minute after the larger attacks began.
And Delta Force was ready. They responded with what U.S. sources called overwhelming force to secure the perimeter. We do know one U.S. helicopter was hit in the exchange.
And about half a dozen U.S. soldiers were injured.
Right, though none were reported to be life-threatening, so it was a brief, violent skirmish.
But the actual capture was extraordinarily quick.
Almost unbelievable. Delta Force reported Maduro in custody roughly 5 minutes after entry.
5 minutes. That time frame just speaks directly to the quality of that pattern-of-life intelligence.
It absolutely validates the entire premise of the intelligence mission. They knew exactly where he slept, which door to breach, how many security personnel were where.
Sources state they were literally dragged from the bedroom while sleeping.
Caught completely unaware, the tactical surprise was total.
They were quickly secured and loaded onto helicopters. By 4:29 a.m., just 2.5 hours after the first bombs fell.
Maduro and Flores were aboard the USS Iwo Jima off the Venezuelan coast.
And the Iwo Jima is key here.
It is. It's a massive amphibious assault ship, a floating fortress. It provided a safe, secure staging point outside Venezuelan sovereign territory.
Immediately shifting the operation from a contested land invasion to a maritime recovery.
Exactly.
Now we get to the long process of transport, which spanned the entire day Saturday, and this is where the U.S. narrative pivots entirely from military to legal.
Precisely. From the USS Iwo Jima, they were transferred, likely through a secure site like Guantanamo Bay, before being flown directly to New York on a specialized FBI aircraft.
And the involvement of the FBI's hostage rescue team is important.
Very important. It ensured the transport remained under the official jurisdiction of U.S. law enforcement, reinforcing the idea that this was an arrest of a federal fugitive.
And the political theater around this legal shift was immediate and deliberate.
Oh, completely. Attorney General Pam Bondi announced the couple would face serious federal charges in the Southern District of New York. Narco-terrorism, cocaine importation, weapons charges. This was the moment the U.S. solidified its legal rationale.
A rationale that became the linchpin of the administration's defense against domestic opposition.
Absolutely. As we'll discuss, key Republican allies, like Senator Tom Cotton, immediately argued that because the FBI and DOJ were the ultimate custodians executing a warrant, the entire operation,
even the F-35 suppression strikes,
could be legally interpreted as a law enforcement function, potentially bypassing the need for congressional notification under the War Powers Act.
But the administration didn't just state the rationale. They turned the extraction into a public spectacle,
The perp walk.
shared by the White House social media account.
That detail is pure political theater. The video showed Maduro, handcuffed, wearing a gray hooded sweatshirt, a deliberate effort to frame him as a common criminal, not a head of state.
And he's being escorted by DEA officers.
And the visual cues were so precise. The carpet he walked down was clearly labeled DEA NYD for New York Division. It was a signal to the American public. This is a drug bust.
And the deposed leader, in a moment of bizarre, nervous deference, was heard saying goodnight and Happy New Year to his captors.
That moment, captured on video, provided incredible psychological closure for the administration. By late Saturday, the couple had arrived at the Metropolitan Detention Center, or MDC, in Brooklyn.
A high-security federal facility.
They were booked, with arraignment expected Monday. So the kinetic military phase was over, achieved in under 3 hours. But the political and strategic firestorm was just igniting.
So as Maduro is sitting in a federal jail cell in Brooklyn, back in Caracas, the regime is scrambling.
Scrambling to define reality and fill this sudden, massive power vacuum.
And they immediately seized upon the collateral damage and the violent capture to frame the action not as an arrest,
but as an invasion. Their response was immediate and focused on national mobilization.
They issued a direct nationwide order. The entire country must mobilize to defeat this imperialist aggression and explicitly people to the streets.
It's an attempt to rally nationalist sentiment and turn the military success of the U.S. into a prolonged resistance movement on the ground.
And to give this mobilization legal backing, they activated a pre-existing legal mechanism.
Right. They signed a decree declaring a state of external disturbance or external commotion across the whole country.
We need to pause and explain what that actually means in Venezuelan law.
It's critical. This state of external disturbance, it's essentially a form of heightened martial law. It grants the executive, the acting government, extraordinary powers.
So they can commandeer private resources, suspend civil liberties,
and mobilize forces beyond the standard military, all under the legal justification of safeguarding sovereignty against an external attack.
And Defense Minister Vladimir Pedrino Lopez confirmed this mobilization was deeply integrated.
He spoke of a civil-military union. They specifically activated the Bolivarian militia, which are armed loyalist civilians, and they vowed to defend the homeland at any cost.
So the remaining regime figures have a dedicated armed popular base to call on,
which could lead to a prolonged internal conflict. Pedrino Lopez also gave a grim confirmation of Delta Force's success, reporting that a large part of Maduro's immediate security detail was killed in the raid.
But the narrative being pushed by Foreign Minister Iván Gil shifted the focus completely to economic motivations.
He stated unequivocally that the U.S. objective was solely to seize Venezuela's strategic resources, particularly oil and minerals,
painting it as a purely capitalist war for oil, a narrative designed to appeal to anti-imperialist sentiments across Latin America.
Exactly. But even as they pushed this unified, defiant message, an immediate and serious contradiction emerged.
Regarding the legitimacy of the post-Maduro leadership,
President Trump initially, publicly, suggested that the acting Vice President, Delcy Rodríguez, was essentially willing to do what we think is necessary for a smooth transition.
That expectation was shattered almost instantly.
It was. The Venezuelan Supreme Court, loyal to the regime, ordered Rodríguez to assume the powers of acting president temporarily, and the military brass immediately recognized her.
But her first public statement was one of outright fierce defiance.
She demanded proof of life for Maduro and his wife, calling the operation a barbaric and illegal and illegitimate kidnapping. She explicitly challenged the U.S. claim of law enforcement jurisdiction,
insisting Maduro was the only constitutional president of Venezuela, a direct rejection of the U.S. narrative.
And her rhetoric was pointed, aimed directly at the international community. She warned, what they did to Venezuela today, they can do to anyone.
So this suggests the U.S. leadership had severely misjudged the loyalty of the remaining figures.
And it led to a much more difficult day-after scenario than they anticipated. Meanwhile, President Trump maintained his aggressive public stance,
stating the U.S. would run Venezuela temporarily until a safe, proper, and judicious transition could occur.
He even named names, Rubio, Pete Hegseth, General Kane, as those who would be involved in administering the country,
effectively suggesting a temporary occupation, and that statement, "We are going to run the country," was the defining soundbite that intensified the international backlash.
It transformed the capture from an arrest into an act of direct imperial control in the eyes of many foreign capitals.
So what was the situation on the ground by Sunday, the day after?
Tense. Caracas was described as eerily quiet. Unusually few vehicles, many non-essential businesses, stores, gas stations, all shuttered.
But underneath the quiet, there was fear.
Palpable fear. People were seen lining up at supermarkets, a rush to secure supplies amid the uncertainty.
And the damage from the strikes was visible.
Very visible in Cachilamar, and you had armed civilians, the loyalist militia, still deployed, conspicuously guarding the presidential palace. This is a state of profound instability, not resolution.
The moment the news broke, the global community's reaction was seismic.
Well, because the U.S. bypassed all international norms. This wasn't a legal extradition through treaties. This was a military raid to seize a sitting head of state.
Triggering the fiercest diplomatic conflict since, the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
Arguably.
Yeah.
The initial reaction from the United Nations was devastatingly critical of the U.S. approach.
Yeah.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was deeply alarmed.
He issued a statement stressing that the operation was a dangerous precedent.
And, most importantly, that established rules of international law were simply not respected.
Which immediately triggered action at the Security Council.
At the request of Colombia, Venezuela's neighbor, and quickly supported by Russia and China, the Security Council scheduled an emergency meeting for Monday to discuss this act of armed aggression.
The condemnation from Moscow and Beijing was absolute.
And coordinated. Russia called the strike a clear violation of international law. China, just as forcefully, demanded the immediate release of Maduro and Flores, calling the action hegemonic behavior.
They're framing this as a direct threat to regional peace and stability.
And implicitly warning against further U.S. military unilateralism.
So what about the regional reaction in Latin America?
Deeply fractured. On one side, you have a significant bloc: Brazil, Chile, Mexico, Spain issuing a joint statement.
And while they may despise Maduro,
they explicitly rejected outside control of Venezuela and warned strongly against the appropriation of natural resources. They denounced the intervention as an extremely dangerous precedent.
But the staunch U.S. allies in the region cheered it on.
Oh, yes. Argentina's President Javier Milei celebrated the arrest as a decisive advance. And you had nuanced positions, like from French President Emmanuel Macron.
He acknowledged the Venezuelan people could only rejoice at being rid of the dictatorship.
But at the same time stressed that the transition must be peaceful and respect democratic processes. The diplomatic tightrope walk was evident everywhere.
Okay, let's pivot back home, because this immediately erupted into a major domestic political fight.
Centered on one question: why wasn't Congress notified ahead of time?
About an action that involved airstrikes and special forces insertion into a foreign capital, actions that are traditionally covered by the War Powers Resolution.
And President Trump's answer was simple and political. Congress has a tendency to leak.
Secretary Rubio provided the operational justification,
arguing it was a trigger-based mission, that conditions whether intel had to be met suddenly, making pre-notification impossible without risking the mission.
But the real crux of the debate is the legal distinction: act of war or law enforcement action.
And that distinction determines the legality of the whole thing. Republican supporters, like Senator Tom Cotton, fiercely argued that since the DOJ and FBI were involved in executing a pre-existing arrest warrant,
it was a law enforcement function.
Exactly. They compared it to the FBI using tactical teams to arrest a fugitive, saying it didn't require the advanced consultation mandates under the War Powers Resolution.
That's a difficult argument to sustain when you have F-35s dropping bombs on military bases.
It is, and Democratic opponents were furious. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer called the action unlawful and unwise, stating pointedly, "You don't treat lawlessness with other lawlessness."
And he promised to force a vote on a War Powers Resolution.
He did. And Senator Tim Kaine emphasized that Congress had been misled, having received assurances 3 separate times that the administration was not pursuing regime change.
He argued the strike lacked any legal justification.
And he directly challenged Congress to get its ass off the couch and exercise its constitutional duty to declare war or prevent it.
The condemnation was echoed by the opposition presidential candidate, former Vice President Kamala Harris,
who asserted that while Maduro is a brutal, illegitimate dictator, the operation was fundamentally unlawful and unwise.
She dismissed the administration's stated rationale entirely,
claiming it was not about law enforcement. She said, "This is not about drugs or democracy. It is about oil and Donald Trump's desire to play the regional strongman."
Which brings us directly to the third great tension here, the economic policy debate around Venezuelan oil.
The entire subtext of the operation for both sides.
Despite the capture, Trump reaffirmed the oil embargo remains in full effect.
And his immediate vision was clear and commercial. American oil companies would invest billions to fix the country's dilapidated infrastructure and get the oil flowing the way it should be.
Tapping into the world's largest proven reserves.
But Secretary of State Rubio quickly tried to temper that expectation, backtracking on Trump's claim that the U.S. would run the country.
Right. He insisted they would use the oil quarantine as their primary weapon, as leverage.
A tremendous source of leverage to force the remaining regime figures into making the right decision. So, influence, not outright occupation.
But regardless of the rhetoric, analysts were quick to pour cold water on the global oil market's reaction.
Because while Venezuela holds a mind-boggling 303 billion barrels of proven reserves, you have to remember that decades of mismanagement and corruption have just decimated their infrastructure.
Production has plummeted to only about 1.1 million barrels a day.
Right. And analysts noted that any immediate output increase is highly unlikely. The infrastructure requires multi-billion-dollar, multi-year rebuilds, the legal issues surrounding nationalized assets are unresolved, and the political instability is just too high.
And it's mostly heavy oil, which is much more difficult and costly to extract.
It is. It requires specialized long-term investment, not quick fixes.
So the market knows that those barrels are likely years away from hitting global supply, if ever.
You know, the capture of Maduro was treated by the administration not just as a successful raid, but as the inaugural action of a massive new shift in U.S. foreign policy.
They used this moment to formally declare a new strategic era.
That shift was solidified when President Trump explicitly confirmed the operation was tied to a revised foreign policy principle, replacing the 1823 Monroe Doctrine.
With what he branded with characteristic flourish, the Monroe Doctrine.
Right, and the Monroe Doctrine, for context, historically asserted that any intervention by external powers in the Americas would be viewed as a hostile act against the U.S.
The Monroe Doctrine takes this a significant step further.
A huge step. Trump's central message is absolute. American dominance in the Western Hemisphere will never be questioned again.
The strategic implications here are enormous. By doing this unilaterally, without UN approval, without OAS endorsement, and without congressional authorization, the U.S. risks providing justification for authoritarians globally.
That's the fear. Critics immediately argued that by asserting unilateral dominance with military force, the U.S. was essentially abandoning the post-WWII rules-based international order it helped build.
So this action could provide justification for, say, Russia and China to pursue their own spheres of influence.
Essentially validating their aggressive geopolitical visions. It sets a dangerous template for unchecked intervention.
And this action was immediately followed by very public and specific warnings aimed at neighboring countries.
Cuba was first on the list.
Secretary of State Rubio stated publicly that Cuba, which had long maintained intelligence agents embedded deep within Maduro's security detail, should be seriously concerned.
Rubio noted that the loss of Venezuela is a crippling blow to Cuba's regional strategy and its economic lifeline.
And Trump reinforced this, saying Cuba is failing and is going to be something we'll end up talking about.
Suggesting Cuba's next on the list for pressure, if not direct action.
But the most shocking and direct warning was delivered to Colombia.
Yes. Trump warned President Gustavo Petro, without any diplomatic language, to watch his lead.
That's remarkably hostile language for one head of state to use toward another, especially a neighbor.
It's a direct consequence of the narco-terrorism mandate being the official justification for the whole operation. Trump tied that threat directly to Colombia's role in the drug trade,
citing Petro's country having cocaine mills and factories.
This broadened the perceived scope of the operation, far beyond Venezuela's borders, suggesting that any nation perceived by the U.S. as facilitating drug trafficking could be subject to similar, swift, aggressive action.
And the political crisis also created an immediate need for practical solutions on the ground,
leading to interventions from unexpected corners, specifically tech and humanitarian aid.
The tech response was Starlink,
Elon Musk's satellite internet service. Recognizing the potential for the remaining regime to shut down local internet, Starlink announced it was providing free broadband service to the people of Venezuela through February 3rd.
Ensuring continued connectivity and access to information, a move Musk publicly supported.
Which is a critical factor for the opposition to organize.
And on the humanitarian front, we saw immediate political action back home.
Miami Mayor Eileen Higgins called for the reinstatement of temporary protective status, or TPS, for Venezuelans already in the U.S.
Citing the extreme instability caused by the capture.
And TPS, for our listeners, is a status for individuals who can't return safely to their home country due to things like armed conflict. The mayor argued that the current instability clearly renders Venezuela unsafe for returnees.
So the U.S. has a moral responsibility not to deport people back into the chaos it created.
Right. And these interventions, whether tech or humanitarian, they just underscore the profound fragility of the whole situation. While the administration touts the military success, the subsequent crisis highlights the complete lack of a clear, stable, internationally endorsed plan for the day after. So as we conclude this deep dive, let's just reflect on the monumental success of the kinetic phase versus the monumental uncertainty of the political phase.
In a military sense, Operation Absolute Resolve was achieved with astonishing speed and precision.
Absolutely. Maduro was captured within 5 minutes of entry and is now in custody in the embassy in Brooklyn, facing the full force of American justice.
But that kinetic success is dwarfed by the massive compounding instability that has engulfed the region.
It really is. You have a crisis of legitimate governance. In Caracas, Vice President Rodríguez is publicly demanding proof of life and denouncing the action as an illegal kidnapping.
Which directly contradicts the U.S.'s expectation of her cooperation.
And globally, you have the UN, Russia, and China all condemning the strike as a violation of international law and a dangerous precedent, threatening to fracture the existing global legal order.
So we can really condense this entire crisis down into 3 fundamental tensions that are going to define the coming weeks.
And ultimately determine Venezuela's future. First, you have the law enforcement rationale, the use of military force to execute an arrest warrant.
Second, the geopolitical assertion, the application of this new Don Roe doctrine, establishing unilateral American dominance.
And third, the economic policy imperative, the race to secure and eventually access Venezuela's vast yet dilapidated oil reserves.
This isn't just about justice or dominance. It's about who controls the largest proven oil reserves on the planet.
And how quickly they can be monetized. The kinetic phase of Operation Absolute Resolve is over, but the political, legal, and economic operation, the far more complicated phase, has only just begun.
So the crucial defining question now is who will win the day in this power vacuum? Will it be the U.S. government trying to manage the country through an oil quarantine?
Will it be the remaining Venezuelan military which has thrown its unified armed weight behind the defiant acting leader, Delcy Rodríguez?
Or will the civilian political opposition figures, like Maria Corina Machado, now scrambling to return, finally seize control and manage the democratic transition they have long sought?
The internal fight for Caracas is just beginning.
Indeed. Venezuela's massive reserves of heavy oil are the prize and also the potential trap.
The final thought we leave you with is this. If the ultimate goal was truly to eliminate drug trafficking and restore stability, why did the administration abandon a global legal framework that, despite its imperfections, was explicitly designed to prevent the exact kind of violent international seizure we just witnessed?
What price, in terms of global legitimacy and future instability, will the abandonment of that post-WWII order exact from the U.S. and its neighbors down the line?
That is the lasting consequence of the Don Roe Doctrine.
That's a serious question to carry forward. Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll be tracking every development of this ongoing crisis next week.